How did decorating a Christmas tree end with a judge ordering my brother to return my house and pay me what he stole? I did not argue, threaten, or beg. I opened one ornament box, followed the rules he thought no one would ever check, and let the system finish the conversation. My name is Holden Trenwick, and I'm 41 years old. I work as a linguist at the university, studying ancient languages most people have never heard of. It's quiet work that pays modestly but keeps me content. My older brother Drew is 43, works as a bodyguard for wealthy clients, and has never let me forget that he earns more in a month than I do in 6. Every December 15th since our mother Lana passed away 3 years ago, Drew and I would meet at the old family house to decorate the Christmas tree. It was the one tradition we maintained, the only time we spent together without arguing about money or our father or the choices we'd made. Drew owned the house now. At least that's what everyone believed. I pulled into the driveway that Tuesday evening, carrying a bag of groceries and wearing the same wool coat I'd owned for 8 years. The house looked exactly as it had when we were children. White colonial with green shutters, a wraparound porch that Lana used to sweep every morning, windows that caught the afternoon light just right. Drew's black Escalade was already there, polished to a mirror shine. Through the living room window, I could see him arranging boxes near the corner where we always put the tree. He was wearing an expensive suit, probably coming straight from work, and his gold watch caught the lamplight as he moved. "You're late," he said when I walked in, not looking up from the ornament boxes. "I've got dinner plans with Elin at 8. "Sorry, faculty meeting ran long." I set my groceries on the side table and looked around the room. Everything was exactly as Lana had left it. Her reading chair by the window, the piano she'd played every evening, the bookshelf full of mysteries and poetry collections. "How's the security business?" "Booming. Just signed a contract with a tech CEO who's worth about $50 million. Guy's paranoid about everything, wants round-the-clock protection for his whole family." Drew opened the first ornament box and began lifting out the familiar decorations we'd hung since childhood. "Meanwhile, you're still teaching kids about Latin verbs for 30 grand a year." I didn't respond. This was how our conversations always went. Drew establishing his financial superiority. Me staying quiet to avoid conflict. I'd learned years ago that arguing with my brother was like trying to reason with a thunderstorm. "Hand me that box of lights," he said, pointing to a cardboard container near my feet. "The LED ones, not the old incandescent bulbs Mom used to insist on." I reached for the box he'd indicated, but my fingers found something else instead. A small wooden container I'd never seen before, tucked behind the light strings. It was about the size of a jewelry box, made of dark cherry wood with brass hinges. The craftsmanship was beautiful, careful, deliberate. "What's this?" I asked, lifting it carefully. Drew glanced over, and his entire demeanor shifted. The casual arrogance disappeared, replaced by something sharp and alert. "Put that back." I've never seen it before. It was hidden behind... I said, "Put it back, Holden." His voice had gone cold, the tone he used when he was about to get physical. "It's nothing important." But I knew my mother. Lana Trenwick was the most careful, intentional person I'd ever known. She didn't hide things unless they mattered. She didn't place objects randomly or forget where she'd put important items. If this box was tucked away in the ornament storage, there was a reason. The wood was smooth under my fingers, warm as if it had been recently handled. There was a small brass nameplate on the lid, engraved with a single letter, H. "It has my initial on it," I said quietly. Drew stepped toward me, his hands clenched. "Give me the box, Holden." "Why? What's in it?" "Nothing that concerns you. Mom was confused near the end, you know that. She probably forgot what she put where." He reached for the box, but I pulled it back instinctively. She wasn't confused. Her mind was sharp right up to the very end. "You weren't here every day like I was. You don't know what she was going through." Drew's face was flushed now, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "You were off at your university, playing with your books, while I was taking care of everything." I looked down at the box in my hands. The brass hinges were well oiled, recently maintained. This wasn't something that had been forgotten or neglected. This was something Lana had preserved. "I'm going to open it," I said. "No, you're not." Drew lunged forward and grabbed my wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You're going to put it back where you found it, and we're going to finish decorating this tree, and then you're going to go home and forget you ever saw it." I looked into my brother's eyes and saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not anger, not frustration, but genuine fear. Drew was afraid of what was in this box. I twisted my wrist free and stepped back. "Why are you so worried about it?" "I'm not worried about anything. I just don't want you going through Mom's private things like some kind of vulture." "Then why does it have my initial on it?" Drew's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. A text from his wife Elin, probably wondering where he was. He looked back at me, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to handle this situation. "Fine," he said finally. "Open it. See what's inside. But when it turns out to be nothing but old letters or jewelry or some sentimental garbage, I don't want to hear any theories about hidden meanings or family secrets." I lifted the brass latch carefully. The hinges moved smoothly, silently. Inside, nestled in dark blue velvet, were 3 items: a small brass key, a folded piece of paper, and a photograph I'd never seen before. The photograph showed our mother standing in front of a bank, holding a document. She was smiling, but it was the careful smile she wore when she was being photographed for official purposes. The document in her hands appeared to be some kind of legal paper, though I couldn't make out the details. I unfolded the piece of paper. It was a note in Lana's careful handwriting. "Holden, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me and you found this box where I hoped you would. The key opens safety deposit box 247 at First National Bank. The account is in your name, established with your social security number when you turned 18. I've been making deposits for 23 years. Drew doesn't know about this account. Your father doesn't know about this account. This is for you, from me, because I wanted you to have something that was truly yours. The house papers are in the box. The real ones. Love, Mom." I read the note twice, my hands trembling slightly. 23 years of deposits. A safety deposit box I'd never known existed. House papers. "What does it say?" Drew asked, but his voice was strange, distant. I looked up at him. "Did you know about this?" "Know about what? It's just a note, right? Some sentimental—" "It's about a bank account and house papers." I folded the note carefully and put it back in the box with the key and photograph. "Real house papers." Drew's face went completely white. "Give me that box." "No. Give me that box right now, Holden, or I swear to God." "Or what? You'll throw me out, cut me off from the family, remind me how worthless I am?" I closed the box and held it against my chest. "I'm going to the bank tomorrow." "You're not going anywhere." Drew stepped forward again, but this time I was ready. I moved toward the front door, keeping the coffee table between us. "This explains a lot," I said quietly. "Why you were so eager to handle Mom's estate. Why you insisted on taking care of all the paperwork. Why you never let me see any of the legal documents." "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know that Mom was careful about everything. I know she loved both of us, but she didn't trust you with money. And I know she was worried about something, or she wouldn't have hidden this box." Drew's phone buzzed again. Another text from Elin. He glanced at it, then back at me, and I could see him making a decision. "Get out," he said. "What?" "Get out of this house, now, and don't come back." "Drew, we can talk about this?" "There's nothing to talk about. You want to go digging around in bank records and legal documents, chasing fantasies about secret accounts? Fine, do it somewhere else. But you're not welcome here anymore." I looked around the living room one more time. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, completely bare. No lights, no ornaments, no star on top. Just a plain evergreen tree in an empty room. "What about our tradition?" I asked. "What tradition? Standing around pretending we're a family? Pretending we have something in common besides a mother who's gone and a father who couldn't stand the sight of us?" Drew walked to the front door and opened it. "The tradition is over, Holden, just like everything else." I walked past him onto the porch, still clutching the wooden box. The December air was sharp and cold, and I could see my breath in small puffs. Behind me, Drew slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat in my car for a long time, engine running, heater blowing warm air across my face. Through the living room window, I could see Drew moving around, but he wasn't decorating the tree. He was on his phone, pacing back and forth, his free hand gesturing angrily. My phone vibrated with a calendar reminder I'd forgotten about. Bank appointment, 2 p.m. tomorrow. I stared at the screen. I hadn't made any bank appointment. This reminder had been in my phone for months, maybe years. I'd always assumed it was some glitch, a leftover from an old calendar sync. But now I wondered if my mother had somehow added it herself, back when she still had access to my phone during family dinners and holidays. A gentle reminder, set to appear when she knew she might not be around to give it in person. I looked down at the wooden box on the passenger seat. Inside was a key to a safety deposit box I'd never known existed, and papers that might change everything I thought I knew about my family. Tomorrow, I would find out what my mother had been trying to tell me. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about Drew's reaction to the wooden box, the way his face had changed when I mentioned house papers. By morning, I'd decided to call in sick to work and spend the day following the trail my mother had left. My apartment was a modest one-bedroom near the university, filled with books and papers and the quiet accumulation of a solitary life. I made coffee and sat at my small kit Calder table, examining the contents of the box again in better light. The photograph was clearer now. I could see that the document in my mother's hands was definitely legal paperwork, with multiple pages and official-looking seals. The bank behind her was First National, the same institution mentioned in her note. The date stamp on the back of the photo showed it was taken 6 months before she was gone. I called the bank and asked about safety deposit box access procedures. The woman on the phone was helpful but firm. I would need proper identification, the key, and the box would have to be registered under my name, or I would need documentation proving I was an authorized user. "What name is the box registered under?" I asked. "I can't give out that information over the phone, sir. You'll need to come in person with proper identification." I showered, dressed in my best suit, and drove downtown to First National Bank. The building was an old limestone structure that had been renovated multiple times but still maintained its original dignity. Inside, the lobby was quiet and professional, with marble floors and dark wood paneling. "I'd like to access safety deposit box 247, I told the woman at the customer service desk. She typed something into her computer and frowned slightly. "Can I see some identification, please?" I handed her my driver's license. She studied it, then typed some more. "Mr. Trenwick, this box is indeed registered under your name. It was established in December 2001. However, I show that there's been some recent activity on the account. Someone else accessed the box about 6 weeks ago." "Someone else? Who?" "I'm sorry, I can't provide that information. But I can tell you that according to our records, there are 2 authorized users on this account. Yourself and—" She paused, checking her screen again. "Lana Trenwick, who I see is marked as deceased. My condolences." 2 authorized users. Just me and my mother?" "That's correct." "Not my brother, Drew Trenwick?" "No, sir. Just you and Lana Trenwick." But someone had accessed the box 6 weeks ago. Someone who wasn't me and wasn't my mother. I felt a cold certainty settling in my stomach. "I'd like to see the box now, please." The woman led me through a secure door and down a corridor lined with safety deposit boxes. She used her key, and I used the brass key from the wooden box, and together we opened box 247. Inside were several manila envelopes and a small stack of documents. I carried everything to a private viewing room and began going through it systematically. The first envelope contained bank statements going back 23 years, showing regular deposits of varying amounts. Small amounts in the early years, $50 or $100 every few months. Larger amounts more recently, sometimes $500 or $1,000 at a time. The account currently held just over $47,000. The second envelope contained copies of legal documents related to the family house. Deed transfers, mortgage papers, property tax records. I spread them out on the table and began reading carefully. According to these documents, my mother had owned the house outright. She'd paid off the mortgage in 1998 and held clear title until she was gone. But there was something else, a will, dated just 3 months before she was gone, leaving the house jointly to Drew and me. Jointly, not to Drew alone. I read the will 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. The house was supposed to be split equally between us, with both our names on the deed. But Drew had been telling everyone, including me, that Mom had left everything to him because he'd been taking care of her. The third envelope contained something that made my hands shake. Copies of documents that had been filed with the county after my mother was gone. Someone had submitted a different will, one that left everything to Drew alone. The signature looked like my mother's, but the date was wrong. It was supposedly signed just 2 days before she was gone, when she'd been unresponsive in the hospital. I sat back in the chair and tried to process what I was seeing. Someone had forged a will. Someone had stolen my inheritance and made it look legal, and that someone had access to this safety deposit box 6 weeks ago. My phone rang. It was May Olin, our elderly neighbor who had been my mother's closest friend. "Holden, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. I heard about the argument with Drew last night. Sound carries, you know, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine, May. Just trying to figure some things out." "Your mother was very worried about something in her last few months. She kept asking me about legal documents, whether I thought people could forge signatures on important papers. She seemed concerned that someone might try to take advantage after she was gone." I gripped the phone tighter. "Did she mention any names?" "Well, she was worried about your father coming back. Porter had been calling her, you know, asking about money and the house. She hadn't heard from him in years, and then suddenly he was very interested in her finances." May paused. "She was also concerned about Drew. She loved him dearly, but she knew he had expensive tastes and debts she didn't fully understand. May, did my mother ever mention a safety deposit box? Oh yes, she asked me to witness some paperwork related to that. She said she wanted to make sure you had something that was truly yours, something that couldn't be taken away or misunderstood. May's voice grew softer. She was very specific about that. She wanted you to have security because she knew you'd never ask for help even if you needed it. I thanked May and hung up, then gathered all the documents and put them back in the envelopes. But I made copies of everything first, using the bank's copy machine. If someone else had been in this box, I wanted to make sure I had backup records. As I was leaving the bank, my phone rang again. This time it was Drew. "Where are you?" he demanded. "Running errands. Why?" "We need to talk. I've been thinking about last night, and I may have overreacted. Why don't you come by the house this evening and we'll discuss this like adults?" I almost laughed. Drew wanted to discuss this like adults, now that he'd had time to worry about what I might find. "I'm busy tonight," I said. "Busy with what?" "You don't have a social life." "I'm meeting with a lawyer." There was a long pause. "A lawyer? What for?" "To discuss some documents I found. Estate planning stuff." "Holden, you're making a mistake. Whatever you think you found, whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Mom left everything to me because I was the one taking care of her. I was the one who paid her medical bills and handled her affairs and made sure she was comfortable." "With what money, Drew? You've always complained about being broke, about having expensive overhead and unreliable clients. Where did you get the money to pay Mom's medical bills?" Another pause. "I took out loans. I borrowed against the house." "What house? The house that belonged to Mom?" "The house that belongs to me now. Look, just come over tonight and we'll sort this out. Bring whatever papers you found and I'll explain everything." "I don't think so." "Holden, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." I hung up and drove to the law offices of Ketter, Halvors and Associates. I'd found them online, a firm that specialized in estate law and probate disputes. I figured it was time to get professional advice about what I'd discovered. Ms. Ketter was a woman in her late 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She listened patiently as I explained the situation and showed her the documents from the safety deposit box. "This is quite serious," she said when I finished. "If these documents are authentic, then someone has committed fraud on a significant scale. Forging a will is a felony, and filing false documents with the county is another felony." "What should I do?" "First, we need to have these documents examined by a forensic specialist. We need to confirm that the will in the safety deposit box is authentic and that the will filed with the county was falsified. Then we need to trace the chain of custody and determine who had access to your mother's papers after she was gone." "How long will that take?" "A few weeks for the forensic analysis. But Mr. Trenwick, I have to warn you. This kind of case can get very ugly very quickly. If your brother has been living in that house and managing the estate under false pretenses, he's going to fight hard to maintain the status quo." I thought about Drew's phone call, his sudden desire to discuss this like adults. "He already knows I'm onto something," I said. "Then you need to be very careful. Don't meet with him alone, don't sign anything he gives you, and don't let him pressure you into dropping this investigation." Ms. Ketter leaned forward. "And Mr. Trenwick, if I were you, I'd be very curious about who accessed that safety deposit box 6 weeks ago." I left her office with a contract for legal services and a list of forensic document examiners. As I walked to my car, I noticed a black Escalade parked across the street. It looked like Drew's, but I couldn't see the driver clearly. I got in my car and drove home, checking my rearview mirror frequently. The Escalade followed me for several blocks before turning off onto a side street. That evening, I sat in my apartment going through everything I'd learned. My mother had left me an inheritance that had been stolen. Someone had forged legal documents to make the theft look legitimate. And now that I was asking questions, I was being followed. I thought about the Christmas tree standing bare in the living room of the house that should have been half mine. I thought about all the times Drew had made me feel small and worthless, all the comments about my modest income and simple lifestyle. But most of all, I thought about my mother, carefully hiding that wooden box where she knew I would eventually find it. She'd been trying to protect me, even after she was gone. Tomorrow, I would start fighting back. The next morning, I woke up to find my car had been vandalized. Someone had keyed deep scratches into the paint on both sides and slashed 2 of my tires. There was no note, no obvious message, but the timing wasn't a coincidence. I called the police and filed a report, though I didn't mention my suspicions about Drew. I needed to be smart about this, not emotional. While I waited for the tow truck, I called Ms. Ketter's office and scheduled an appointment with Mr. Halvors, the forensic document examiner she'd recommended. "Can you bring the original documents?" his secretary asked. Mr. Halvers will need to examine the paper, ink, and any impressions left by writing instruments. I have copies, but the originals are in a safety deposit box. That's fine. We can arrange to examine them at the bank if necessary. Mr. Halvers has done that before in sensitive cases. After my car was towed to the repair shop, I took a cab to the university and tried to focus on my regular work. But I kept thinking about the vandalism, about Drew following me yesterday, about the fear I'd seen in his eyes when I found the wooden box. During my lunch break, I walked to the public library and used their computers to research property records. The county clerk's office had an online database where I could look up the ownership history of my family's house. What I found made my stomach drop. According to the official records, the house had been transferred from Lana Trenwick to Drew Trenwick on the day after her funeral. The transfer document was signed by both of them, witnessed by two people I didn't recognize, and notarized by a notary public whose license I could verify online. But my mother had passed away on a Tuesday. The service was held on Friday. The document was supposedly signed on Saturday, 3 days after she had already been laid to rest. I printed out the records and studied them carefully. The signatures looked authentic at first glance, but I wasn't a handwriting expert. What bothered me more were the witnesses. I'd never heard the names before, and they weren't family friends or neighbors who might have been helping with estate matters. I looked up the witnesses online. One was listed as an employee of Drew's security company. The other was someone named Porter Trenwick, our father. Porter had abandoned us when I was 6 years old. He'd walked out one morning and never came back, never called, never sent money or birthday cards or any acknowledgement that he'd ever had children. My mother had raised us alone, working 2 jobs and never complaining about the man who'd left her with nothing. But somehow, Porter had been in town for my mother's funeral and had witnessed the document that transferred her house to Drew. I felt sick. This wasn't just about forged documents or stolen inheritance. This was about my father and brother conspiring to cheat me out of everything my mother had tried to leave me. I called May Olin from the library. May, I need to ask you about something. Was my father at Mom's funeral? Oh, yes, dear. He showed up right at the end, after the service was over. I was surprised to see him. Your mother hadn't mentioned that she'd been in contact with him. Did he talk to Drew? They left together, actually. I remember thinking it was odd, because Drew had been so angry about your father for so many years, but they seemed to have worked things out. Did you see them again after that? Well, Porter was around for a few days. I saw him at the house with Drew, going through your mother's things. I assumed Drew had invited him to take some mementos or something. Going through my mother's things. Looking for documents, probably. Making sure they had everything they needed to complete their fraud. May, do you remember anything unusual about the days after the funeral? Any visitors to the house? Any official-looking people? There was a notary public who came by on Saturday, a woman with a briefcase. She was there for about an hour, and then she left with Drew and your father. A mobile notary brought to the house to witness and certify falsified documents. They'd planned it carefully, likely while my mother was still in the hospital in her final condition. I thanked May and hung up, then sat in the library for a long time, thinking. Drew and Porter had stolen my inheritance, but they had been smart about it. They'd created a paper trail that looked legitimate. They'd used a real notary and filed the documents properly with the county. Unless I could prove the signatures were forged, their version of events would stand up in court. But I had something they didn't know about, the real will in the safety deposit box, and a mother who'd been careful enough to preserve the truth. That afternoon, I met with Mr. Halvers at his office downtown. He was a thin man in his 50s with careful hands and magnifying equipment that looked like it belonged in a laboratory. Document forgery has become quite sophisticated, he explained as he examined copies of the disputed papers. But there are always telltale signs if you know what to look for. Pressure patterns, ink composition, paper aging, the natural flow of handwriting versus careful copying. How long will the analysis take? For a preliminary assessment? A few days. For a full forensic report that would hold up in court? 2 to 3 weeks. He looked up from his magnifying glass. But Mr. Trenwick, I can tell you right now that something doesn't look right about these signatures. The pen pressure is too uniform, and there are hesitation marks that suggest someone was copying rather than writing naturally. What about the notarization? That's easier to verify. Every notary public keeps a log of their services, and they're required to check identification before notarizing documents. If your mother was already deceased when these papers were supposedly signed, there should be a record of that. I left his office feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in days. The truth was going to come out, and when it did, Drew and Porter would have to answer for what they'd done. But as I walked to the bus stop, my phone rang. It was Elin, Drew's wife. Holden, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee? I don't think that's a good idea, Elin. Please, just hear me out. There are things you don't understand about Drew's situation, about why he's been so protective of your mother's estate. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a cafe near the university. Elin was a polished woman in her mid-30s who'd married Drew for his money and status. She drove a BMW, wore designer clothes, and had never worked a day in her life. Drew is in trouble, she said without preamble when I sat down across from her. His business is failing, and he owes money to some very dangerous people. The house is the only asset he has left. That's not my problem, Elin. But it could become your problem if you keep pushing this investigation. These people don't care about legal documents or family disputes. They just want their money. I studied her face. She looked genuinely frightened, but I couldn't tell if she was worried about Drew or about losing her comfortable lifestyle. What people? Who does he owe money to? I can't tell you that. But Holden, if you force him to give up the house, if you take away his only source of collateral, they might come after you too. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. There's a difference. She leaned forward. Look, I know Drew can be difficult. I know he's not always fair to you, but he's my husband and he's in real danger. Can't you just let this go? Let it go? Elin, he stole my inheritance. He forged legal documents and filed them with the county. He conspired with our father, who abandoned us 35 years ago, to cheat me out of everything my mother wanted me to have. Your mother left you that bank account. Isn't that enough? I stared at her. How do you know about the bank account? Elin's face went pale. Drew doesn't know about the bank account. I never told him about it. I felt the pieces clicking into place. Someone accessed that safety deposit box 6 weeks ago. Someone who wasn't authorized to be there. Holden, you're misunderstanding. It was you, wasn't it? You and Drew somehow got into that box and saw what was there. You've known all along that I had evidence of the real will. Elin stood up abruptly. I have to go. Sit down, Elin. We're not done talking. Yes, we are. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. And Holden, be very careful about what you do next. Drew is desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices. I sat in the cafe for another hour, trying to figure out how Drew and Elin had accessed my safety deposit box. They would have needed my identification, my social security number, and probably some kind of forged authorization. It was another felony to add to the growing list. When I got home that evening, there was a message on my answering machine from Drew. Holden, I know you talked to Elin today. I know you think you figured something out. But you're playing with fire here, little brother. Some things are bigger than your hurt feelings about inheritance money. Call me back, and let's work this out before it's too late for both of us. I didn't call him back. Instead, I called Ms. Ketter and told her about my conversation with Elin and the unauthorized access to the safety deposit box. This is escalating quickly, she said. I think we need to move faster than we originally planned. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I want to file an emergency motion with the court to freeze any further transfers of the property. What does that mean? It means Drew won't be able to sell the house or use it as collateral until this matter is resolved. It also means he's going to know that you're serious about pursuing this legally. He already knows I'm serious. Mr. Trenwick, after tomorrow, there will be no going back. Once we file court papers, this becomes a public legal dispute. Your brother will have to hire lawyers, and this will probably end up in the newspapers. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my mother, hiding that wooden box where she knew I would find it. I thought about Drew throwing me out of the house and leaving the Christmas tree bare. I thought about Porter showing up after 35 years to help steal from the children he'd abandoned. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. The next morning, Ms. Ketter filed a motion for a temporary restraining order against any further transfers of the property. By noon, Drew would know that I was coming for him with the full force of the legal system. And by tomorrow, I would find out just how dangerous a desperate man could be. The restraining order was served on Drew at his office on Thursday afternoon. I knew because Ms. Ketter called me immediately afterward to let me know the papers had been delivered successfully. His attorney will have to respond within 5 business days, she explained. But Mr. Trenwick, I should warn you that your brother seemed quite agitated when he was served. The process server said he had to call security to escort him out of the building. That evening, I was grading papers in my apartment when someone started pounding on my door. Heavy, aggressive knocks that made my neighbor's dog start barking. Open up, Holden. I know you're in there. It was Drew, and he sounded furious. I looked through the peephole and saw him standing in the hallway, still wearing his expensive suit, but with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. Go away, Drew. We can talk through our lawyers. Open this door right now, or I'll break it down. I'm calling the police? You think the police are going to help you? You think your lawyers are going to protect you? He kicked the door hard enough to rattle the frame. You have no idea what you've started. I called 911 and reported a domestic disturbance. While I waited for the police to arrive, Drew continued shouting and pounding on the door. Other tenants came out into the hallway to see what was happening. This is my brother, Drew announced to anyone who would listen. He's trying to take my house using falsified paperwork and false claims. He's desperate and can't accept that our mother cared more about me. When the police arrived, Drew was sitting on the floor in the hallway with his head in his hands. The officers asked him to leave the building, which he did without further argument, but not before looking directly at me and saying, "This isn't over." The next morning I had a meeting with Mr. Halvers to review his preliminary findings about the document forgery. His office was in a converted warehouse downtown, filled with scientific equipment and filing cabinets full of evidence from various cases. The results are quite clear, he said, showing me enlarged photographs of the disputed signatures. These documents were definitely forged. The signature on the property transfer shows clear signs of tracing. Someone used a lightbox or similar device to copy your mother's signature from another document. Can you prove it in court? Absolutely. I can show the pressure patterns, the hesitation marks, even traces of pencil guidelines that weren't completely erased. He pulled out another photograph. But there's something else interesting. The paper used for the forged will is wrong. Wrong how? Your mother's real will was written on legal stationery from a specific law firm. The forged will uses similar paper, but it's a different weight, and the watermark is from a different manufacturer. Someone tried to match it, but didn't get it exactly right. What about the notarization? I spoke with a notary public whose seal appears on the documents. She has no record of notarizing anything for the Trenwick family, and her logbook shows she was out of state on the day these papers were supposedly signed. I felt a surge of satisfaction. Drew and Porter had been clever, but not clever enough. They'd left a trail of evidence that would destroy them in court. How soon can you have a full report ready? 1 week. But Mr. Trenwick, I should mention that someone called my office yesterday asking about this case. They claimed to be from your brother's legal team, but they were asking questions that seemed more like fishing for information than legitimate legal inquiry. What kind of questions? Whether I'd found any evidence of forgery, whether I was planning to testify in court, that sort of thing. I didn't tell them anything, of course, but it suggests that your brother is getting desperate. That afternoon, I drove to the county property records office to research the ownership history of the house more thoroughly. I wanted to understand exactly how Drew had managed to transfer the property so quickly after our mother was gone. The clerk who helped me was a middle-aged woman named Janet, who'd been working there for 20 years. This is an unusual case, she said, after pulling the relevant files. Normally, when someone passes away, there's a probate process that takes months before property can be transferred. But this transfer happened very quickly, within days of the certificate being filed. Is that legal? It can be, if the proper documentation is provided. In this case, someone submitted what appeared to be a valid will, along with an affidavit stating that the property was being transferred according to the deceased's wishes. Who submitted the documents? Janet checked her records. Drew Trenwick and Porter Trenwick, acting as co-executors of the estate. Co-executors? But Porter Trenwick is the father who abandoned the family decades ago. I can only process the documents that are submitted to me, sir. If they appeared to be properly notarized and witnessed, I had no reason to question them. I asked for copies of everything in the file, including the original transfer documents. As I was leaving the building, my phone rang. It was May Olin, and she sounded upset. Holden, dear, I think someone broke into your mother's house last night. I saw lights moving around inside, but Drew's car wasn't in the driveway. Did you call the police? I wasn't sure what to do. Technically, it's Drew's house now, isn't it? But something didn't feel right about it. I'm coming over. I drove to the old neighborhood and met May on her front porch. From there, we could see the house clearly. The front door was standing slightly open, and there were muddy footprints on the porch steps. It definitely wasn't Drew, May said. These people were bigger, rougher looking. They had a van parked across the street for about an hour. I called the police and reported a possible break-in. When the officers arrived, they found that the house had been thoroughly searched. Drawers were pulled out, closets were emptied, and furniture had been moved around, but nothing appeared to be stolen. Looks like they were looking for something specific, one of the officers said. Any idea what that might be? I didn't mention the wooden box or the safety deposit box, but I had a pretty good idea what the intruders had been seeking. Drew must have told his creditors about the legal dispute, and they were worried that he might lose the house before they could collect their money. That evening, I met with Ms. Ketter at her office to discuss the escalating situation. Your brother is clearly feeling the pressure, she said after I told her about the break-in and the phone call to Mr. Halvers. The question is whether he's going to try to settle this quietly or fight it publicly. What do you think he'll do? Based on what you've told me about his financial situation and his personality, I think he's going to try one more time to intimidate you into dropping the case. If that doesn't work, he'll probably claim that you're the one who forged documents and that the safety deposit box evidence was planted. Can he do that? He can try. But we have the forensic evidence, the bank records, and testimony from witnesses who knew your mother's intentions. The truth is on our side, Mr. Trenwick. The question is whether you're prepared for how ugly this is going to get before it's over. I thought about Drew pounding on my door, about strangers searching through my mother's house, about Elon's warning that desperate people make dangerous choices. I'm prepared, I said. But even as I said it, I wondered if I really understood what I was getting myself into. Drew wasn't just fighting for money or property anymore. He was fighting for his life, and people in that situation were capable of almost anything. The next week would show me just how far my brother was willing to go to protect his lies. On Monday morning, I received a call from someone I'd never expected to hear from, my father. Holden? This is Porter Trenwick. I almost hung up immediately. I hadn't spoken to my father since I was 6 years old, and I had no desire to start now. What do you want? I want to talk to you about this legal situation with Drew in the house. I think there's been a misunderstanding, and maybe we can work something out. There's no misunderstanding. You and Drew forged documents to steal my inheritance. That's not what happened, son. Your mother was very confused in her final months, and she signed some papers that didn't really reflect her true wishes. Drew was just trying to honor what she really wanted, which was for him to have the house since he'd been taking care of her. The casual lies, the smooth manipulation, I could see where Drew had learned his techniques. I'm not your son, I said. You gave up that right when you abandoned us 35 years ago. I know I made mistakes, Holden. I know I wasn't the father you deserved. But family is family, and we should be able to work this out without lawyers and court battles. Where are you calling from? I'm in town. I've been here for a few weeks, helping Drew sort through some business problems. Why don't we meet for coffee this afternoon? Just the two of us, no lawyers, no pressure. I almost said no automatically, but then I realized this might be an opportunity. If Porter was willing to talk, he might accidentally reveal something useful about how they'd carried out the fraud. Fine. But I'm bringing a recording device, and anything you say can and will be used against you in court. That's fair. How about that little cafe on Elm Street at 3 o'clock? I spent the rest of the morning preparing for the meeting. I charged my phone's recording app, reviewed all the evidence I'd gathered so far, and called Ms. Ketter to let her know what I was doing. Be very careful, she warned. This could be a setup. They might be planning to claim that you threatened them or tried to extort money. I'll be in a public place with witnesses. That's good, but remember, don't make any deals, don't sign anything, and don't let them provoke you into saying something you'll regret. I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window where I could see the street. Porter showed up exactly on time, and I was shocked by how much he'd aged. He was in his mid-60s now, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. He looked tired and defeated, nothing like the confident man who'd walked out on his family decades ago. Thank you for meeting me, he said as he sat down. I know this must be difficult for you. Let's skip the pleasantries, Porter. What do you want? I want to explain what really happened with your mother's estate, and I want to offer you a deal that might work for everyone. I started the recording app on my phone and placed it on the table between us. Go ahead. Your mother had been ill for a long time before she was gone, not just physically, but mentally as well. She was suspicious, disoriented, convinced people were trying to take advantage of her. She hid money in odd places, created multiple wills that conflicted with each other, and kept changing her mind about who should inherit what. That's not true. May Olin saw her regularly, and she was sharp right to the end. May Olin is an older woman who sees what she wants to see. The truth is, your mother called me about 6 months before she was gone and asked me to help sort out her affairs. She was worried about you, Holden. She thought you were too naive, too trusting to handle a large inheritance. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was furious. This was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd expected. So she asked you, the man who abandoned his family, to help manage her estate? She asked me to make sure Drew got the house, because Drew had been taking care of her and had invested his own money in maintaining the property. She wanted you to have some money, which is why she set up that bank account, but she didn't think you were ready for the responsibility of owning real estate. Then why forge the will? If that's what she really wanted, Why not do it legally? Porter's eyes shifted slightly. The will she signed near the end was unclear. The language was confusing, and it would have led to exactly the kind of legal battle we're having now. Drew and I decided to simplify things by filing a cleaner version that reflected her true intentions. A cleaner version? You mean a forged version? I mean a version that prevented a long, expensive probate fight that would have benefited no one except the lawyers. I leaned forward. Porter, I have forensic evidence that the documents you filed are forgeries. I have testimony from the notary public whose seal you used illegally. I have bank records showing that you accessed my safety deposit box without authorization. You're going to prison for this. For the first time, Porter looked genuinely worried. Holden, you don't understand the bigger picture here. Drew owes money to some very dangerous people. If he loses the house, if he can't pay them back, they're going to hurt him. They might hurt his wife. They might even come after you. That's not my problem. It could become your problem very quickly. These people don't care about legal documents or family disputes. They just want their money, and they'll get it from whoever they think has it. I turned off the recording app and put my phone away. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Look, here's what I'm proposing. You drop the legal case, let Drew keep the house, and we'll give you an additional $50,000 from the equity. That's more than you'd get from your share of the inheritance after legal fees anyway. $50,000? The house is worth at least $400,000. The house has a mortgage, property taxes, maintenance costs. By the time everything is settled, your half wouldn't be worth much more than $50,000 anyway. I stood up. This conversation is over. Holden, wait. Don't make a decision you'll regret. Take a few days to think about it. I don't need a few days. The answer is no. As I walked toward the door, Porter called after me. You always were a stubborn kid, just like your mother. I hope it doesn't get you into the same kind of trouble it got her into. I stopped and turned around. What kind of trouble did it get her into? But Porter was already walking away, leaving money on the table for his untouched coffee. That evening, I met with Ms. Ketter to play her the recording and discuss Porter's offer. $50,000 is insulting, she said after listening to the conversation. But more importantly, this recording is evidence of attempted bribery and intimidation. We can use this in court. What about his threats about dangerous people? That's harder to prove, but it suggests awareness of wrongdoing. If they were innocent, why would they be talking about threats and force? Ms. Ketter, there's something else. At the end of the conversation, Porter made a comment about my mother getting into trouble because she was stubborn. What do you think he meant by that? She frowned. I'm not sure, but it might be worth looking more closely at the circumstances surrounding your mother's passing. Was there anything unusual about her final illness? I thought about it. My mother had been diagnosed with cancer and was gone within 6 months. It had seemed like a typical progression of the illness, but I'd been so consumed by grief that I hadn't asked many questions. I could request her medical records, I said. That might be a good idea. If Porter and Drew were planning this scheme for months before she was gone, there could be signs of that in her medical treatment or the timing of her decline. As I drove home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Porter's final comment. My mother had been the strongest, most careful person I'd ever known. What kind of trouble could her stubbornness have led her into? And why did I feel like I was about to find out? The medical records arrived on Friday morning, and what I found in them made me feel physically unwell. My mother's cancer diagnosis had been real, but according to her oncologist's notes, she should have lived at least another year, possibly 2. Her condition had been stable, the treatment was working, and the outlook was cautiously optimistic. Then, 6 weeks before she was gone, there were notes about a sudden downturn. Confusion, weakness, symptoms that didn't match her type of cancer. The doctor had ordered additional tests, but she was gone before the results came back. I called Ms. Ketter immediately. This is extremely serious, she said after I read her the relevant portions of the medical records. If your mother's passing was deliberately accelerated by someone who stood to benefit from her estate, we're talking about a grave criminal act. What should I do? We need to contact the police immediately. This is beyond a civil matter now. This is a criminal investigation. But before I could call the police, my phone rang. It was May Olin, and she was crying. Holden, dear, something terrible has happened. Drew is at the hospital. Someone attacked him in the parking lot of his office building. I felt a cold shock. Despite everything Drew had done, he was still my brother. How bad is it? I don't know. Elin called me because she didn't know who else to contact. She said he's in surgery, and the doctors aren't sure if he's going to make it. I drove to the hospital and found Elin in the waiting room. She looked terrible. Her makeup was smeared, her expensive clothes were wrinkled, and her hands were shaking. What happened? I asked. I don't know exactly. Drew was leaving work around 6 o'clock, and someone was waiting for him in the parking garage. They beat him with a baseball bat or something similar. She looked up at me with red eyes. This is because of the money, isn't it? The people he owes money to? I don't know, Ellen. Yes, you do. And this is your fault. If you hadn't started this legal case, if you just left things alone, none of this would have happened. I wanted to argue with her, but the truth was that I felt guilty too. I'd known Drew was in trouble with dangerous people, and I'd pushed forward with the lawsuit anyway. Have you talked to the police? I asked. They're here somewhere asking questions. But what am I supposed to tell them? That my husband stole his brother's inheritance and now someone wants to collect on his debts? A doctor came out and spoke to Elin quietly. Drew was stable, but critical. He had multiple broken bones, internal bleeding, and a severe head injury. He would live, but his recovery would be long and difficult. As I sat in the waiting room, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The wooden box, the forged documents, the threats, and intimidation. And now Drew was fighting for his life because of debts he'd accumulated trying to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Drop the case or you're next. I showed the message to the police detective who was investigating Drew's attack. He was a tired-looking man in his 40s named Detective Morrison. We've been expecting something like this, he said. Your brother owed money to some very dangerous people. This was likely meant as a warning. Next time it could turn far worse for him. What about the threat against me? We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood, but honestly, the best thing you can do is resolve this legal dispute as quickly as possible. These people don't care about inheritance law or family feuds. They just want their money. But I'd come too far to stop now, and I had one more piece of evidence that would change everything. The next morning, I met with Ms. Ketter and Detective Morrison at the district attorney's office. I brought all the evidence I'd gathered. The falsified documents, the medical records, the recording of my conversation with Porter, and the threatening text message. The assistant district attorney was a sharp woman in her 30s named Sage Calder, who specialized in white-collar crime. This is one of the most comprehensive fraud cases I've seen, she said after reviewing everything. We have document falsification, identity misuse, probate fraud, and indications of deliberate wrongdoing tied to your mother's passing. We can take Drew and Porter Trenwick into custody immediately. Drew is in the hospital, I said. Then we'll start with Porter. Detective Morrison, do you know where he's staying? We've been watching him since the attack on Drew. He's at a motel on the east side of town. Good, let's bring him in. Porter was arrested that afternoon and charged with multiple felonies. When the police searched his motel room, they found copies of forged documents, my mother's original medical records, and a notebook detailing the plan to steal my inheritance. But the most damning evidence was a recorded phone conversation between Porter and Drew, discussing how to speed up Mom's timeline so they could execute their plan before she had a chance to change her will again. Ms. Calder played the recording for me in her office. She's getting suspicious, Drew's voice said. She keeps asking questions about the house papers and why Porter is suddenly back in the picture. Don't worry about it, Porter replied. I've been adjusting her medication. She'll be confused enough that anything she says won't be taken seriously, and if we're lucky, she won't be saying anything much longer. I had to leave the room. My mother hadn't been lost to illness. She'd been deliberately taken from us by members of her own family who wanted to take what wasn't theirs. The story broke in the local newspaper 3 days later. Local security company owner charged in mother's case inheritance scheme. By then, Drew was awake and talking, and he agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a lighter outcome. The civil case moved quickly after that. A judge ordered the house transferred back to me, along with all proceeds from the fraudulent estate. Drew and Porter were required to repay the money they had taken, along with additional compensation for emotional harm. Ellen filed for divorce immediately. Drew's business collapsed once the charges became public. His creditors were taken into custody as part of a larger organized crime investigation. Porter admitted responsibility for the case involving my mother and the financial scheme. He received a lengthy custodial sentence. Drew also admitted his role in the fraud and conspiracy. Because he cooperated with investigators and due to lasting injuries, his sentence was significantly reduced. 6 months later, I stood alone in the living room of my family home, decorating a Christmas tree. I'd kept most of my mother's ornaments, but I'd added a few new ones too. A quiet reset for a house that had carried too much sorrow. May Olin stopped by with cookies and hot chocolate, just like she had when I was a child. Your mother would be proud of you, she said as we hung the last ornament. She always said you were stronger than you looked. I don't know about that. I just followed the path she left for me. That takes strength too, dear. It would have been easier to walk away. I switched on the tree lights and stepped back. It was beautiful, filled with memories and a sense of hope. On the mantel, I placed the wooden box that had started everything. Inside, along with the original key and photograph, was a copy of the court ruling that restored what was mine and exposed the truth about what had been done to my mother. Resolution came not through force or vengeance, but through patience, proof, and the legal system my mother had trusted to protect her children. The house was mine now, fully and lawfully. But more than that, the truth was finally out, and those who had betrayed my mother's trust were facing the consequences of their actions. I sat in my mother's old reading chair, looking at the tree, thinking about tradition, family, and the difference between shared history and real loyalty. Drew had been my brother, but he chose money over family. Porter had been my father, but he chose greed over his children. My real family was the memory of my mother, the kindness of neighbors like May, and the satisfaction of knowing that truth and justice still mattered in the world. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in clean white silence. Inside, the tree lights twinkled softly, and everything was exactly as it should be.